So it's November 11th. Not sure how the year has gotten away from us, but today is the 315th day of 2018. Doesn't feel like it's been 315 days, but it has been 315 days. Of course, sad news is that in that 315 days, this week in Thousand Oaks, California, was the 307th mass shooting of 2018. That's according to Gun Violence Archive, a nonprofit that tracks these shootings, and they define a mass shooting as any time that 4 people are shot, not including the shooter. So if at least 4 people are shot, not including the shooter, Gun Violence Archive counts that as a mass shooting. And meeting that description, Thousand Oaks, California shooting this week was the 307th meeting that description in the now 315 days. And I didn't look, but it's not impossible that we might have had more since that shooting to today. Because were you aware that between the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting and the Thousand Oaks shooting, there were 11 mass shootings in the United States in those less than 2 weeks? There were 11 shootings where at least 4 people were shot in between the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting 2 weeks ago and the Thousand Oaks shooting this week. It's become so commonplace that most of the mass shootings barely even make news where they occur. Basically, we have to have double-digit deaths before we hear about them. Meanwhile, our elected representatives continue to really refuse to do anything about it beyond the statement or tweet sending victims their thoughts and prayers. I don't know if you saw this week, but one of the victims in the Thousand Oaks shootings was Tel Orfanos. And his mother, Susan Orfanos, was interviewed. And she said, basically, you can keep your thoughts and prayers. I don't want any more of your thoughts and prayers. I want gun control. Tel Orfanos, who died in the Thousand Oaks shooting last year, was in Las Vegas and survived the Las Vegas shooting, but was there. Something that should be so rare, this man was in 2 mass shootings in 1 year and was unable to survive the second time. I can understand why his mom doesn't want thoughts and prayers. The worry she must have had knowing her son was at that concert in Las Vegas, hearing about the shooting, and there had to be at least some amount of time before she heard from her son that he was okay. No one should have to go through that once, let alone twice. Many of those claiming that they send their thoughts and prayers, and this is on both sides of the aisle. There are Democrats as guilty of this as Republicans, claim large amounts of money from the NRA. And so while they say thoughts and prayers, they also line their pockets with money that means they will not allow anything to happen legislatively on the issue of guns in this country. And many of those claiming they send their thoughts and prayers, but intend fully to do absolutely nothing about the issue, also claim to be Christian. As Christians, we should know that prayer requires action. We're not done by just praying about something. If we ask God to work in the world, you better believe that God expects us to be working in the world as well. In fact, that's how God works in the world, is through us. We can't say, God, take care of this. That's not how it works. If we want to pray about something, we also have to do something. So saying thoughts and prayers and then doing nothing is not Christian. Hopefully we see the hypocrisy behind those statements, thoughts and prayers. Of course, I wish hypocrisy in those claiming to be Christian or even religious wasn't such a common problem. But it is. It's not even a new problem. It's not a random new occurrence where we see those wearing their Christianity proudly while their actions and their hypocrisy do more to color the perception of Christianity to the world than any effective evangelism ever could. We lose more people to the way that Christians act out in the world in their hypocrisy than we could ever hope to gain through effective evangelism. Our actions speak louder than our words. But we see in our scripture today that hypocrisy has plagued religion for quite some time. And Jesus goes on a bit of a rant about it when he sees the scribes at the temple. Now, the scribes were incredibly respected religious teachers of the time. And they had these fancy, ornate clothing that they're supposed to wear when they're performing their official scribe duties. But they wore them all the time because they loved the respect they got while they were wearing their ornate robes while they were doing their duty. They're like, you know what? We should just wear this all the time, and people will respect us and treat us as well all the time. And so that's what they did. So they were wearing their robes of office just hanging out, because they craved more the recognition and the respect than the duty that they had or the God that they claimed to serve. We have a word for that, of course. It's idolatry. When you really love something else more than God, or you're giving what you should be giving to God to something else, and craving that respect and that admiration, that's idolatry. Now, meanwhile, widows, especially in that time, absolutely represented the most vulnerable segment of society. You see, a woman had no rights to any property of her own. It was all her husband's property. Anything she brought into the marriage went to him. She didn't hold anything herself. So when her husband died, it didn't go to her. If they were lucky, they had male children that it would go to that would continue to take care of their mother. But that wasn't always the case. Sometimes there was either no children, or those children were gone, or there was some way that she was just out on the street with nothing, no one to take care of her. And so part of the position of the scribes was they, the church, the temple, got those goods, all that the husband didn't have anyone to give to. The scribes were in charge of that. So when Jesus talks about devouring the widows' houses, what's going on is, instead of using that to take care of the widows, or even to better the church, they're lining their own pockets. They're using it to better themselves, better their own lives. In fact, one of the most important commandments of the Torah is the responsibility to take care of the widows. And these scribes were using that money that should have been available to take care of these widows to instead better their own lives. I don't know about you, but I can't think of very many things that are more evil than that are more anti-God than that. Taking that which should have secured these women's future, who are already in an awful place, and keeping it for yourself and making their situation even worse. The hypocrisy is astounding. A lot of times people just look at the second part of the scripture and just look at the widow who's giving all she has. Do you see how important this first part of the scripture is to really understand what's going on with the widow? If we don't have the scribes and what they're doing particularly to the widow, we don't get how incredible it is that the widow is giving all she has. It becomes more about maybe, well, we should give more ourselves and should give all we have. And that's there and that's good. But that's not what's really going on here. We have a power differential. And God is saying, you want to know whose side I'm on? You want to know where to find me? It's with the widow, who despite all of the hypocrisy and all of the challenges and all of everything she is facing, she's doing more to further my cause than all the rest of them. It's interesting the way that Mark presents it, because it almost could be read as not that she's giving more than any one of them in the little bit that she gives, but that she's giving more than all of them combined in the little bit that she gives. She gives her life. She gives everything she's got. If we think about it in regards to the greatest commandments, love God with all your heart, strength, soul, mind. Love God with everything, in other words. That's what she's doing. You may remember Mark, unlike Luke, doesn't talk a lot about poverty in his gospel. Doesn't talk about the poor, doesn't talk about money. Luke loves to talk about the poor. Mark doesn't as much. But we talked about it recently. There was the man who came up and said, hey, I'm doing all these good things. What do I need to do? And Mark told him, remember, give up everything you have and follow me. And he couldn't do it. But this widow's doing it. She's giving all in order to support the community. A woman whose community is scripturally supposed to support her and yet isn't, is making sure that she gives all to support that community. That's powerful. That's amazing. Someone who is supposed to be being supported by the community and isn't, is making sure that she's still doing all she can to support her community. To love her neighbors with all that she has. It isn't the scribes that serve God. It is the robbed widow. It is the victim who is truly doing God's work. You know, there were a lot of interesting stories this week. We had the elections this week. Sometimes some funny things happen in elections. Two of my favorite stories from the week is Kim Davis, if you remember Kim Davis. In Kentucky, she's a county clerk. when the law came down that LGBTQI plus people, same-sex marriage was legal, Kim Davis refused to issue a marriage license, which is part of her job as an elected official, refused to issue a marriage license. Well, this week she was up for re-election. She lost to one of the men she refused to give a marriage license. That's pretty great. That's pretty great. But the greatest story that I saw from this week was from someone in response to the hypocrisy that our elected officials have on gun control. In 2012, a young man named Jordan Davis was hanging out with his friends in Florida. And they went to a gas station. There were 4 of them in the car, and Jordan was in the back seat. And the driver got out, filled the car up, and then went into the store to get something. And so they're sitting in the car, and they had their music up. And it was loud. And it was rap, because they were young black men who enjoyed rap music. Well, another car came up, a man and his girlfriend, white. The man got out of the car and made a remark about the music. There's some controversy about exactly what that remark was, but some people who overheard it claim it was a racist remark about the music being played. So he ends up going and asking the people in the car to turn it down. At first they do, but then they're like, well, it's our car. Why do we have to turn it down? We're going to have like a 30-second interaction, basically, before we drive off. So they turn it back up. He goes into his car, he gets a gun, and he fires 10 shots into the car, 8 of which hit Jordan Davis. He then drives away. Jordan Davis dies. His mother, Lucy McBath, ended up becoming active in Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. She would become their national spokesperson. She became involved with Everytown for Gun Safety. She would become the outreach and faith leader for both those organizations. And this year, after the Parkland shooting, when she saw that elected officials continued to do nothing besides send thoughts and prayers, she decided she was going to run for Congress. She just won the 6th District of Georgia. Newt Gingrich's old seat, a black woman, running on gun reform, gun control. Like the widow in our story, Congresswoman-elect Lucy McBath didn't let the attempts of the hypocritical leaders stop her for working from justice. She said this week, after she was announced the winner, that she is still and will always be Jordan's mom. That will always be her most important title, no matter how many other titles she gains, including now Congresswoman. And that everything she is doing is still for her son and for all of those who have lost their lives to the senseless problem of gun violence in this country. And let me tell you, our country's obsession with guns is idolatry. Just like the scribes' obsession with their admiration and respect. Choosing to refuse to take any action or even have the discussion beyond the meaningless, hypocritical thoughts and prayers shows that the importance and love for guns in this country are held as more important than the innocent lives of God's children. And folks, that is idolatry. But giving all of yourself in order to combat this idolatry, like the widow that gave all that she had, giving more than all of the hypocritical so-called leaders combined, it isn't hard to see who's doing God's work. Church, may we be as brave. May we give as much for the work that God calls for.